Marcus Reed thought accepting a security job for a racist billionaire was just about the money, until he discovered that some prejudices crumble under the weight of unexpected love. Eleanor Whitmore had spent her entire life believing she was superior to people like Marcus, but when her carefully constructed world began to fall apart, she realized the man she'd hired to protect her body might be the only one who could save her soul. What started as a business arrangement between two people from opposite sides of society's divide would soon become a love story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. But when Eleanor's powerful father discovers their forbidden romance, the stakes become deadly, and both Marcus and Eleanor must choose between the safety of their separate worlds and a love that could destroy them both. Their story will make you question everything you think you know about love, prejudice, and the courage it takes to fight for what's right. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from. Because this story about breaking down walls might just break down some of your own assumptions too. Marcus Reed adjusted his tie for the third time as he sat in the waiting room of Elite Protection Services. The leather chairs were the kind that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and everything around him screamed expensive. He checked his watch. 10 minutes early, just like always. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, glanced at him over her computer screen. Her smile was polite but distant. "Mr. Reed, they'll see you in just a moment." "Thank you," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. He'd been through enough job interviews to know the drill. "Stay calm, be professional, and don't let anyone see you sweat." A tall man in an expensive suit emerged from a corner office. "Marcus Reed?" He extended his hand. "I'm David Chen, Director of Operations. Thanks for coming in." Marcus stood and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for considering me." David led him into the office and gestured to a chair across from his desk. The walls were lined with certificates and photos of David shaking hands with people Marcus didn't recognize, but who looked important. "So," David began, settling into his chair, "you've got an impressive background. Military police, private security for 5 years, excellent references. But I have to ask, why are you interested in this particular position?" Marcus had prepared for this question. "I'm looking for stable, long-term work that pays well. I have a 7-year-old son, and I want to provide for him." David nodded slowly. "That's honest. I appreciate that." He leaned back in his chair. "Let me be equally honest with you. This isn't a typical security job. Our client is challenging. We've had 4 guards quit in the past 6 months." "What kind of challenging?" "She's demanding, very particular about how things are done. And she can be—" David paused, choosing his words carefully. "Difficult to work with. The pay is excellent, nearly double what you'd make elsewhere, but it comes with a price." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He needed this job. The security work he'd been doing lately was inconsistent, and Liam's school was expensive. His son deserved better than the uncertainty they'd been living with. "What exactly would my responsibilities be?" "Personal protection for Eleanor Whitmore. She's a wealthy businesswoman who's had some security concerns lately. Nothing too serious, but she wants someone around during the day. You'd work Monday through Friday, mostly at her estate. Some travel, but not much." Marcus had heard the name before. Whitmore Industries was one of those companies that seemed to own half the buildings in the city. Old money, the kind that had been around for generations. "Why do the guards keep quitting?" David sighed. "Look, I'll be straight with you. Ms. Whitmore has some preconceived notions about people. She can say things that are inappropriate. Most of our guys don't last more than a few weeks." The way David said it made Marcus's stomach sink a little. He'd dealt with racism before, both in the military and in civilian life. but he'd never had to smile and take it as part of his job description. I need to think about. The starting salary is $80,000 a year, David interrupted, plus benefits, and if you last more than 6 months, there's a substantial bonus. Marcus felt his breath catch. 80,000 was more than he'd made in his best year. It would mean Liam could stay in his school. It would mean they could move to a better neighborhood. It would mean not lying awake at night wondering how he was going to pay the bills. When would I start? Monday, if you're interested. But Marcus, I need to know you can handle this. Ms. Whitmore is going to test you. She's going to say things that will make you angry. If you lose your temper, even once, you're gone. Can you handle that? Marcus thought about Liam's face when he'd had to explain why they were moving to a smaller apartment. He thought about the worried look in his son's eyes when Marcus thought he wasn't watching. Yes, he said. I can handle it. David studied him for a long moment. I hope so, because underneath all the attitude, I think she's scared, and scared people sometimes lash out at the wrong targets. I understand. Do you have a suit for tomorrow? She's particular about appearance. Marcus nodded, though he'd probably have to take his one good suit to the dry cleaners tonight. Good. Be there at 8 a.m. sharp. The address is in this packet. David handed him a manila envelope. And Marcus, good luck. You're going to need it. The drive to Eleanor Whitmore's estate took Marcus through some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The houses got bigger and more spread out as he drove, until finally he turned onto a private road lined with tall oak trees. The Whitmore estate sat at the end of the road like something out of a magazine. It wasn't the biggest house Marcus had ever seen, but it was elegant in a way that spoke of old money and careful taste. The gardens were perfectly maintained, and a fountain sat in the center of the circular driveway. Marcus parked his Honda Civic next to a BMW and a Mercedes, feeling suddenly self-conscious about his car. He grabbed his briefcase and walked to the front door, checking his watch. 7:58. The door opened before he could knock. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes smiled at him. You must be Mr. Reed. I'm Vivian Hale, Ms. Whitmore's assistant. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Please, call me Vivian. Come in. I'll show you around before Ms. Whitmore meets with you. The inside of the house was as impressive as the outside. High ceilings, expensive artwork, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. But despite its grandeur, something felt cold about the place, like a beautiful shell with nothing living inside. The house has 15 rooms, Vivian explained as they walked. Ms. Whitmore spends most of her time in the East Wing, her office, the library, and her private sitting room. Your main responsibility is to stay close enough to respond if needed, but not so close that you're intrusive. They stopped in front of a set of double doors. She's waiting for you in her office. A word of advice, Mr. Reed? Don't take anything she says personally. She's testing you. Marcus nodded and knocked on the door. Come in. Eleanor Whitmore sat behind a massive wooden desk, reviewing documents. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Everything about her posture screamed control and authority. She looked up as he entered, and Marcus saw her eyes take in his appearance, his dark skin, his carefully pressed suit, his professional demeanor. Something shifted in her expression, a hardening that Marcus recognized all too well. So you're the new guard, she said, not bothering to stand or offer her hand. Yes, ma'am. Marcus Reed. I suppose they told you I'm difficult to work with. They mentioned you have high standards. Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. High standards? That's diplomatic. She stood and walked around the desk, studying him like he was a piece of equipment she was considering purchasing. Let me guess, she continued, her voice taking on a mocking tone. You're here because you need the money. Probably got some sob story about family obligations or debts to pay off. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, but kept his voice level. I'm here because I'm good at my job, ma'am. I'm sure you are. What was it before this? Security guard at some mall? Bouncer at a club? The assumptions hit Marcus like physical blows, but he'd been preparing for this since his conversation with David Chen. I was military police for 8 years, then private security for 5 years. My references are in the file. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. Files can say anything. What I want to know is whether you can follow instructions without getting emotional. The way she said emotional made it clear she was really talking about his race. Marcus had heard this particular dog whistle many times before. I can follow instructions, ma'am. Good, because I don't tolerate attitude or excuses. You'll be here every weekday at 8 a.m. sharp. You'll wear a suit every day, a clean suit. You'll speak only when spoken to unless there's a security issue. And you'll remember that you work for me, not the other way around. Understood. Eleanor returned to her desk and sat down. Vivian will show you the security system and give you the daily routine. Try not to break anything. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. Ms. Whitmore? She looked up, irritated. What? I've worked for a lot of different people over the years, rich people, poor people, all kinds, and I've learned that everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. That's what I'm here for. Nothing more, nothing less. For just a moment, something flickered across Eleanor's face. Surprise, maybe, or uncertainty. But it was gone so quickly, Marcus might have imagined it. We'll see, she said, and returned to her papers. The first week passed in a routine of polite hostility. Eleanor would greet Marcus with cold professionalism each morning, give him unnecessary instructions about things he already knew how to do, and generally treat him like he was invisible unless she needed something. Marcus bit his tongue and did his job. He memorized the house's layout, learned the security system, and established patrol routes that kept him close enough to respond to any issues, but far enough away to avoid Eleanor's constant scrutiny. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the way Eleanor looked at him, like she was waiting for him to confirm every negative assumption she had about him. Like she expected him to steal something, or lose his temper, or prove that hiring him had been a mistake. But Marcus had learned patience from his father, who had worked as a janitor for 30 years and never once let anyone make him feel small. Dignity comes from inside, his father used to say. Nobody can take it from you unless you let them. On Friday of his first week, Marcus's carefully maintained routine was disrupted. His sister Angela called at lunchtime, sounding frazzled. Marcus, I'm so sorry, but I can't pick up Liam today. My meeting ran long and I'm stuck downtown. Can you get him? Marcus checked his watch. It was already past 3, and Liam's school got out at 3:30. I'm at work, Angie. I can't just leave. I know, but there's no one else. His after-school program doesn't start until Monday, remember? Marcus closed his eyes. Liam's school was 40 minutes away, and he'd have to bring him back to the estate while he finished his shift. The thought of Eleanor meeting Liam, of her directing her assumptions toward his 7-year-old son, made his chest tight with protective anger. Okay, he said finally. I'll figure something out. He found Vivian in the kitchen and explained the situation. She listened with a concerned frown. I'm sure it will be fine, she said. Ms. Whitmore mentioned she'd be in meetings all afternoon anyway. Just bring him to the kitchen when you get back. I'll keep an eye on him. Thank you. I really appreciate this. Marcus drove to Liam's school with his hands clenched on the steering wheel. This job was too important to risk over a childcare emergency, but he couldn't leave his son waiting at school either. He found Liam sitting on the steps with his backpack, looking small and a little worried. When he saw Marcus, his face lit up with a smile that never failed to make everything else fade into the background. "Dad? I thought you forgot about me." "Never," Marcus said, kneeling down to hug him. "Aunt Angie got stuck at work, so you're coming to work with me for a little while? But you have to be really, really good, okay? This is important." "Okay. What kind of work do you do again?" "I help keep someone safe, like a bodyguard." Liam's eyes went wide. "Really? Like in the movies?" "Sort of, but much more boring." The drive back to the estate gave Marcus time to coach Liam on the rules. Be polite, be quiet, stay with Vivian, and don't touch anything. Liam listened seriously and promised to be good. They entered through the kitchen door, where Vivian was waiting with a warm smile and a plate of cookies. "You must be Liam," she said. "I've heard so much about you." "Nice to meet you, ma'am," Liam said, exactly the way Marcus had taught him. "What good manners. Come on, let's get you settled while your dad finishes work." Marcus was checking the security monitors in the front hall when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor appeared, looking annoyed. "Vivian, who's that child in the—" She stopped when she saw Marcus. "You brought a child here?" "Yes, ma'am. I had a childcare emergency and—" "I don't care what your emergency is. This is a private residence, not a daycare center." Marcus felt his professional composure wobble. "Ma'am, it's just for an hour, and he's staying in the kitchen with—" "I don't want children running around my house, breaking things and making noise." From the kitchen came the sound of Liam's laughter as Vivian showed him something. It was a bright, innocent sound in the cold elegance of the house. "He's 7 years old," Marcus said quietly. "He knows how to behave." Eleanor was about to respond when Liam appeared in the doorway, having apparently wandered out of the kitchen to find his father. "Dad, the nice lady said I could have a cookie, but I should ask you first." Marcus felt his heart sink. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. "Liam, I told you to stay in the kitchen." "I know, but I wanted to ask—" Liam stopped as he noticed Eleanor standing there. With the instinctive politeness Marcus had drilled into him, he turned to face her. "Hello, ma'am. I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to be here." Eleanor stared at him, and Marcus saw something unexpected cross her face. Liam looked nothing like the assumptions she might have made about Marcus's son. He was dressed neatly in his school uniform, spoke clearly and politely, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that was purely his own. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked, her voice softer than Marcus had ever heard it. "Liam Reed, ma'am." "How old are you, Liam?" 7. I'll be 8 next month." "And what grade are you in?" "2nd grade. I like school a lot, especially reading." Eleanor glanced at Marcus, then back at Liam. Something in her expression was shifting, like a mask slipping just enough to show confusion underneath. "I see," she said finally. "Well, I suppose one cookie would be acceptable." Liam beamed. "Thank you, ma'am. Dad always says I should ask permission before I take things that aren't mine." After Vivian had taken Liam back to the kitchen, Eleanor stood in the hallway for a long moment, not saying anything. Marcus waited, expecting another lecture about appropriate behavior. "He's very polite," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. I've tried to teach him good manners." "Where does he go to school?" Marcus named the private elementary school that cost him a small fortune each month, but was worth every penny for the education Liam received. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an excellent school." "Yes, ma'am. I want him to have every opportunity." She studied Marcus with a new expression, still guarded, but curious in a way she hadn't been before. "You can finish your shift," she said. but this can't happen again. Understood. Thank you. That evening, after Marcus had taken Liam home and helped him with his homework, his son looked up from his math problems with a thoughtful expression. Dad, the lady at your work seems sad. Sad? Why do you think that? I don't know. She has a really big house with lots of pretty things, but she looked lonely, like when Mrs. Johnson from our old apartment building used to sit by her window all day. Marcus studied his son's face. Liam had always been perceptive about people's emotions, sometimes seeing things that adults missed. Maybe she is a little lonely, Marcus said. Some people have trouble making friends. Maybe you could be her friend. You're good at making people feel better. Marcus smiled and ruffled Liam's hair. I'm just there to do my job, buddy. But I'll try to be kind. Later that night, after Liam was asleep, Marcus sat on his small apartment's balcony and thought about the day. The job was still a minefield of Eleanor's prejudices and assumptions, but something had shifted when she met Liam. For just a moment, her guard had come down enough for him to see that maybe David Chen had been right. Maybe underneath all the hostility was someone who was afraid. The second week started differently. Eleanor still maintained her cold professionalism, but Marcus caught her watching him with a new kind of attention. Not the suspicious surveillance of before, but something more like puzzlement. On Wednesday morning, she stopped him as he was reviewing the day's schedule. Your son, she said abruptly. How do you manage school pickup and work? The question surprised him. Usually my sister helps out. Friday was unusual. And if she can't? Marcus hesitated. I figure it out, ma'am. I always figure it out. Eleanor nodded slowly. Children need consistency. Yes, ma'am, they do. She turned to walk away, then stopped. The security in the East Wing's been making noise at night. I want you to check all the door sensors today. Of course. It was busy work. Marcus had checked those sensors twice already this week, but he did as he was told. As he worked, he found himself thinking about Liam's observation. Eleanor did seem lonely, moving through her enormous house like a ghost haunting beautiful rooms. That Friday afternoon, Eleanor surprised him again. I've been thinking about your scheduling situation, she said. If you need to leave early for family obligations, you can make up the time on weekends. Saturday mornings, perhaps. Marcus stared at her. It was the first genuinely considerate thing she'd said to him. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. It's purely practical. I need consistent coverage, and if you're worried about your son, you won't be focused on your job. But there was something in the way she said it that suggested it wasn't purely practical at all. By the end of his second week, Marcus realized that Eleanor's hostility was starting to feel more like habit than genuine malice. She still made cutting remarks and treated him with professional distance, but the sharp edge of racial animosity had dulled slightly. It wasn't progress, exactly, but it wasn't getting worse either, and for now, that would have to be enough. The third week brought an unexpected change to their routine. On Monday morning, Eleanor emerged from her office looking pale and tense. There was an incident over the weekend, she announced without preamble. Someone tried to get onto the property Saturday night. The police think it was just teenagers, but I want increased security measures. Marcus straightened. This was the first real security concern since he'd started. What kind of incident? Motion sensors went off around midnight. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had gone. They found evidence someone had been near the back gate. Did they take anything? Leave any threats? No, but I don't like the idea of people sneaking around my property. Eleanor's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the underlying anxiety. I'll do a full perimeter check and review all the camera footage from the weekend. Good. And I want you to stay later in the evenings this week, until we know what we're dealing with. Marcus spent the morning walking the grounds and checking every sensor, camera, and lock. The property was large enough that it took him nearly 3 hours to complete a thorough inspection. When he returned to the house, he found Eleanor pacing in her office. "Well?" she demanded. "Everything's secure now. I found where they came over the fence. There's a tree branch that's grown close enough to the back wall to make climbing easier. I've already called a tree service to have it trimmed." Eleanor nodded, but her tension didn't ease. "What about the cameras?" "I reviewed all the footage. It was definitely just one person, probably young, based on how they moved. They spent about 10 minutes near the pool house, but didn't try to enter anything. More curious than threatening." "I see." Marcus hesitated, then added, "Ma'am, if you're concerned about security, there are some improvements we could make. Better lighting in the back garden, maybe an additional camera angle near the gate. Whatever you think is necessary, cost isn't an issue." That evening, Marcus found himself staying at the estate until nearly 8 o'clock, waiting for the new security equipment to be installed. Eleanor had insisted on being present for the installation, and as the technicians worked, she hovered nearby with barely contained anxiety. "Would you like me to explain how the new system works?" Marcus offered when the technicians had finished. "Yes, I want to understand everything." They spent the next hour going over the enhanced security features. Eleanor listened intently, asking detailed questions about response times and backup protocols. As they talked, Marcus noticed that her formal mask was slipping slightly. She seemed less like the cold, controlling woman he'd first met, and more like someone genuinely worried about her safety. "This should give you much better coverage," he concluded. "And I'll be here until 7 each night this week to monitor things." "Good." Eleanor paused, then surprised him by adding, "Would you like some coffee? It's going to be a long evening." It was the first time she'd offered him anything beyond the basic courtesies required by employment. "That would be nice, thank you." They sat in the kitchen, neutral territory, Marcus supposed, drinking coffee and reviewing the security schedule. In the softer lighting, Eleanor looked younger than her 32 years, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, then immediately wondered if he was overstepping. Eleanor looked up from her coffee. "What?" "Have you had security problems before? You seem more worried than someone should be over one incident, with teenagers." For a moment, Eleanor's face went completely blank. Then, to Marcus's surprise, she answered honestly. "My father receives threats sometimes. Business-related mostly, but occasionally they spill over to family members. I've had to deal with unwanted attention before." "What kind of attention?" "Photographers, reporters, people who think having money means you owe them something." She paused, staring into her coffee cup. "And sometimes people who blame you for things you had nothing to do with." Marcus nodded. He'd worked for wealthy clients before and understood how money could make people a target for all kinds of resentment. "That's why you prefer to stay home," he said, not quite a question. "It's easier, safer." Eleanor met his eyes briefly, then looked away. "I know how that sounds. Poor rich girl afraid to leave her mansion." "I wasn't judging you. Everyone has a right to feel safe." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression. Surprise, maybe, that he wasn't mocking her fears. "Most people don't see it that way. Most people haven't had to deal with what you deal with." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Marcus found himself seeing Eleanor differently. The sharp edges and cold hostility were still there, but underneath them was someone who was genuinely afraid. Fear could make people defensive in ugly ways. "Your son," Eleanor said suddenly. "How do you keep him safe? In a world where people might judge him before they know him?" The question caught Marcus off guard. It was the first time Eleanor had brought up Liam without prompting, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way she asked. "I teach him to be proud of who he is," Marcus said slowly. "And I try to show him that most people are good, even when they don't seem like it at first. And if they're not good, then I make sure he knows that their problems aren't his fault, that he doesn't have to carry other people's fear or anger." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "That's a hard lesson to learn." "For kids, you mean?" "For anyone." That night, as Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, he found himself thinking about the conversation. For the first time since he'd started working for Eleanor, he felt like he'd talked to a real person instead of a defensive wall. The next morning brought another shift. Eleanor greeted him with her usual cool professionalism, but there was less edge to it, and when she gave him instructions for the day, she actually looked at him instead of addressing a point somewhere over his shoulder. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she said as he prepared to begin his rounds. "About the security improvements. I'd like your opinion on whether we need additional cameras in the front of the house as well." It was a small thing, but it was the first time she'd asked for his professional opinion rather than simply giving orders. "I think the front is pretty well covered," Marcus replied. "But I could do a more detailed assessment if you'd like." "Yes, I want a complete security evaluation. Take your time and be thorough." Marcus spent the day mapping sightlines, testing equipment, and identifying potential vulnerabilities. It was the kind of work he was genuinely good at, and it felt good to use his skills properly instead of just standing around looking intimidating. When he presented his findings to Eleanor that afternoon, she listened carefully and asked intelligent questions. Her suggestions showed she'd actually thought about security rather than just throwing money at the problem. "You really know this business," she said when they'd finished reviewing his recommendations. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Where did you learn? Military training?" "Some of it, but mostly from experience. I've worked for people in a lot of different situations over the years." "What kinds of people?" Marcus hesitated. Eleanor had never shown interest in his background before. "Politicians, executives, a few celebrities, anyone who needs protection for whatever reason." "Did you like that work? Before this, I mean." It was an oddly personal question. "Most of the time. I like helping people feel safe. And I'm good at reading situations, staying calm when things get complicated." "That's obvious," Eleanor said quietly. "You're very steady." There was something in the way she said it that made Marcus look at her more closely. She seemed almost surprised by her own observation. "Thank you, ma'am." That evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, Eleanor stopped him in the front hall. "I wanted to thank you," she said formally, "for taking the security situation seriously. I know it probably seems like an overreaction to you." "Not at all. You have a right to feel secure in your own home." Eleanor nodded, then surprised him by adding, "I sleep better at night knowing you're here during the day. That probably sounds foolish." "No, ma'am. It doesn't sound foolish at all." As Marcus drove home that night, he realized something fundamental had changed. Eleanor was still guarded, still maintaining professional distance, but the hostility was gone. In its place was something that might eventually become trust. He thought about what Liam had said, that Eleanor seemed sad and lonely. Maybe his son had been right. Maybe underneath all the defensive behavior was someone who just wanted to feel safe and understood. It wasn't friendship yet. It wasn't even warm cordiality. But it was human connection, tentative and careful though it might be. And for the first time since taking this job, Marcus felt like he might actually be helping someone instead of just enduring their prejudices for a paycheck. The thought surprised him with how good it felt. The fourth week began with an incident that changed everything between them. Marcus arrived Monday morning to find Eleanor's car still in the driveway and Vivian waiting by the front door with a worried expression. "She hasn't come down for breakfast," Vivian said quietly. "She's always up by 7, but it's past 8:30 now. I knocked on her bedroom door, but she won't answer." Marcus felt a spike of concern. "Did you hear anything unusual during the night?" "No, but she seemed anxious yesterday evening. She kept checking the windows and asking about the security system." "Which room is hers?" Vivian led him upstairs to a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. Marcus knocked firmly. "Ms. Whitmore, it's Marcus. Vivian's concerned about you." Silence. "Ma'am, I need to know you're okay. If you don't answer, I'm going to have to come in." After a long moment, he heard the lock turn. The door opened just enough for Eleanor to peer out. Her hair was disheveled. She was still in her nightgown and robe, and her face was pale with exhaustion. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice shook slightly. "You don't look fine. What happened?" Eleanor glanced past him to where Vivian stood waiting at the top of the stairs. "Nothing happened. I couldn't sleep." Marcus studied her face and saw something he recognized from his military days. The hollow-eyed look of someone who'd spent the night listening for danger. "Did you hear something? See something?" "No, maybe. I don't know." Eleanor's composure was cracking. "Every little sound I kept thinking someone was trying to get in." Marcus felt a wave of understanding. The security incident from the previous week had affected her more deeply than she'd let on. "Ma'am, would you feel better if I checked the whole house? Made sure everything's secure?" Eleanor hesitated, pride warring with fear. "You already checked everything yesterday." "I'll check again. Sometimes peace of mind is worth the extra effort." Something in his calm tone seemed to steady her. "All right. Yes, I'd appreciate that." Marcus spent the next hour going through every room, checking every lock, testing every sensor. It wasn't necessary from a security standpoint, but he understood that Eleanor needed the reassurance. When he finished, he found her in the kitchen with Vivian, nursing a cup of coffee, with hands that still trembled slightly. "Everything's secure," he reported. "No signs of any problems. The new system worked perfectly all night." "Thank you." Eleanor's relief was visible. "I know I'm being ridiculous." "You're not being ridiculous. You had a security scare, and now you're taking it seriously. That's smart, not ridiculous." Eleanor looked at him with surprise, as if she'd expected mockery instead of understanding. "I used to have panic attacks," Marcus said quietly. "After I came back from deployment, little sounds would set me off, and I'd spend hours checking locks and windows. It's normal to feel vulnerable after something like this." "You had panic attacks?" Eleanor seemed genuinely shocked that he would admit to such a thing. "For about a year. It gets better with time, but you have to be patient with yourself." Eleanor stared into her coffee cup. "I haven't slept properly since it happened. Every time I close my eyes, I imagine someone breaking in." "Would it help if I stayed later this week? Just until you feel more settled?" "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." For the first time since he'd met her, Eleanor's carefully maintained mask completely disappeared. She looked up at him with genuine gratitude and something that might have been relief. "Yes," she said quietly. "That would help a lot." That evening, Marcus found himself staying at the estate until nearly 9 o'clock. Eleanor had insisted he have dinner with her and Vivian instead of eating alone in the kitchen, and the three of them had shared a surprisingly comfortable meal. "How do you do it?" Eleanor asked as they finished eating. "Stay so calm, I mean. Even when I'm being horrible to you, you never lose your temper." Marcus considered his answer carefully. My father taught me that anger is usually just fear wearing a mask. When someone's being difficult, I try to figure out what they're afraid of instead of getting mad about how they're acting. And what do you think I'm afraid of? Being hurt, being disappointed, being seen as weak. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. You think I'm weak? I think you're human. We're all afraid of something. What are you afraid of? The question caught Marcus off guard. No employer had ever asked him something so personal. Failing my son, not being able to provide for him or protect him or give him the life he deserves. Is that why you took this job? Even though you were testing me? Yes. Eleanor flinched slightly at his honesty. I was awful to you. You were scared. Scared people sometimes act in ways they wouldn't normally act. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. And understanding why someone does something is the first step to forgiving them for it. Eleanor stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're very wise for someone so young. I'm not that young, and wisdom comes from making mistakes, not from avoiding them. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself actually enjoying Eleanor's company. Without her defensive walls fully up, she was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny. She asked about his military service, his family, his hopes for Liam's future. And for the first time, her questions seemed motivated by genuine curiosity rather than suspicious judgment. I owe you an apology, she said as the evening wound down. For the things I said when you first started working here? For the assumptions I made. Thank you. That means a lot. I was raised to believe certain things about people. About different kinds of people. It's taken me a long time to realize that what I was taught might not be true. Marcus nodded. We all inherit ideas from our families. The hard part is figuring out which ones to keep and which ones to let go. How do you know which is which? You test them against reality. You pay attention to actual people instead of assumptions about people. Eleanor smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from her. Like letting a 7-year-old boy prove that everything you thought you knew about his father was wrong? Exactly like that. The next few days passed in an atmosphere of cautious friendship. Eleanor was still formal during business hours, but the sharp edge was gone. She asked Marcus's opinion on security matters, listened to his suggestions, and even shared coffee with him in the afternoons. More importantly, she seemed to be sleeping better. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, and her anxiety about the security incident was gradually settling into reasonable caution. On Thursday afternoon, Eleanor surprised him with an unusual request. I have a meeting downtown tomorrow, she said. The first time I've left the house for business in over a month. Would you be willing to drive me? Of course, that's part of my job. I know. But I wanted to ask, rather than just telling you to do it. It was a small thing, but it marked another shift in how she saw him. Less like hired help, more like a professional colleague. The drive into the city gave them time to talk, without the formal structure of the estate around them. Eleanor seemed more relaxed away from the house, more like the woman Marcus had glimpsed during their evening conversations. Can I ask you something personal? She said as they navigated downtown traffic. Sure. Do you ever regret taking this job? Even with the money, it must be difficult working for someone like me. Marcus considered his answer. The person you were when I started? That was difficult. But the person you are now? No, I don't regret it. I'm not sure I'm different. I think maybe I'm just showing you parts of myself I usually keep hidden. Why do you keep them hidden? Eleanor was quiet for several blocks. Because when you show people your real self and they reject you anyway, it hurts worse than if they just reject the mask. Marcus understood that feeling. But if you never show people your real self, you never find out who might actually accept you. That's terrifying. Yes, but it's also the only way to build real connections with people. Eleanor's meeting went well, and on the drive back to the estate, she seemed lighter somehow, more hopeful. "Thank you," she said as they pulled into the driveway. "For driving you?" "For everything. For being patient with me. For helping me feel safe. For seeing something in me that might be worth knowing." Marcus turned off the engine and looked at her. "Eleanor?" It was the first time he'd used her first name, and they both noticed it. "I want you to know that who you're becoming, who you really are underneath all the fear, that person is definitely worth knowing." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "I haven't had a real friend in a very long time." "Well, now you do." As they walked toward the house together, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed between them. They weren't employer and employee anymore. Or at least, not only that. They were two people who had found something valuable in each other: understanding, acceptance, and the beginning of genuine friendship. It felt like the start of something important, though Marcus couldn't yet imagine how important it would become. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself looking forward to work in a way that had nothing to do with the paycheck. The estate had become a place of comfortable routine, where he and Eleanor had settled into an easy friendship, built on mutual respect and genuine care. Eleanor had started asking him to stay for dinner several times a week, and their conversations had become the highlight of both their days. She told him about her childhood, about the loneliness of growing up with parents who valued appearances more than affection. He shared stories about Liam, about his sister Angela, about the small joys and daily struggles of being a single father. "You should bring Liam by again sometime," Eleanor said one Friday evening as they sat in the garden watching the sunset. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I was unkind to a child who did nothing wrong." "He'd like that. He asks about you sometimes." "What does he ask?" "Whether you're still sad. Whether you have any friends to talk to when you're lonely." Eleanor smiled softly. "He's very perceptive." "Too perceptive sometimes. He sees things other people miss." "What does he see in you?" Marcus considered the question. "Someone who's trying his best, but doesn't always know if it's enough." "It's enough," Eleanor said quietly. "More than enough." There was something in her voice that made Marcus look at her more carefully. In the golden light of evening, with her guard completely down, Eleanor looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with money or status. She looked real. "Eleanor," he said, then stopped, suddenly aware they were moving into dangerous territory. "What?" "Nothing. I should probably head home. Liam has a soccer game tomorrow morning." "Of course." Eleanor stood as well, but neither of them moved toward the house. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything you've done for me these past few weeks. I know it goes beyond your job description." "You don't have to thank me for being your friend." "Yes, I do. Because friendship is a choice, and you chose to see something good in me when I wasn't showing you anything good." They stood there in the gathering darkness, and Marcus felt something shift between them, a awareness that had been building for days, but which neither of them had acknowledged. Eleanor was no longer just his employer or even just his friend. She was a woman he cared about, deeply and completely. "I should go," he said again, but he didn't move. "Marcus." Eleanor stepped closer, close enough that he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Marcus felt his heart race and his carefully maintained professional boundaries crumble. Eleanor. I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why it's a bad idea. But I need you to know how I feel. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the wealthy woman who signed his paychecks, but the person who had trusted him with her fears, her hopes, her real self. It is complicated, he said finally. But that doesn't change how I feel about you. How do you feel about me? Marcus stepped closer, close enough to touch her face gently with his hand. Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. Like I want to protect you from everything that's ever hurt you. Like I'm terrified of disappointing you. You could never disappoint me. I could. We're from very different worlds, Eleanor. People are going to have opinions about us being together. Let them have their opinions. I'm tired of living my life based on what other people think. Marcus studied her face in the dim light. Are you sure? Once we cross this line, we can't go back to the way things were. I don't want to go back. Do you? Instead of answering with words, Marcus leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, full of all the feelings they'd been building toward for weeks. Eleanor kissed him back with a sweetness that made his chest ache with how much he cared about her. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. What happens now? She whispered. I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. The next morning brought reality crashing back in. Marcus arrived at work to find Eleanor in her office, back to her formal demeanor, though he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Good morning, she said carefully. Good morning. They looked at each other across the professional space of her office, both unsure how to navigate this new territory. I've been thinking about last night, Eleanor said, about what we said. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Having second thoughts? No, but I think we need to be smart about this. Figure out how to handle the complications. What kind of complications? Eleanor gestured to the space between them. I'm your employer. There's a power imbalance here that makes everything more difficult. Marcus had been thinking the same thing. So, what do you want to do? I want to be with you, but I want to do it right. No secrets, no hiding, no pretending that the circumstances aren't complicated. Okay, what does that look like? Eleanor took a deep breath. First, I want you to meet with HR at my company. Make sure you understand your rights, your protections, everything. I don't want you to ever feel like your job depends on our personal relationship. And second, I want you to bring Liam to dinner this Sunday. If we're going to do this, he needs to be part of it from the beginning. Marcus felt a wave of love for her so strong it nearly knocked him over. Even in the midst of figuring out their own relationship, she was thinking about his son's needs. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He's the most important person in your life. That means he's important to me too. That Sunday evening, Marcus sat in his car outside the estate with Liam, both of them dressed in their best clothes. Are you nervous, Dad? Liam asked, adjusting his tie. A little bit. Are you? Kind of, but I like Ms. Eleanor. She seems nicer now than when I met her before. She is nicer now. Or maybe she's just letting us see the nice parts of herself. Why would someone hide the nice parts? Marcus smiled at his son's innocent question. Sometimes people get hurt, and they think if they don't show their nice parts, they won't get hurt again. That's silly. The nice parts are the best parts. Yes, they are. Eleanor greeted them at the door wearing a simple dress instead of her usual business attire. She looked nervous, but genuinely happy to see them. Hello, Liam. I'm so glad you could come to dinner. Thank you for inviting me, Miss Eleanor. My dad says you make really good food. Eleanor laughed. Well, Vivian does most of the cooking, but I helped with dessert tonight. Dinner was a revelation. Liam charmed Eleanor with stories about school and soccer, and she listened to him with the same focused attention she gave to business meetings. More importantly, Marcus could see her falling in love with his son, not in a romantic way, but in the way that people fall in love with children who show them wonder and possibility. Can I show you my homework? Liam asked as they finished eating. We're doing a project about families. I'd love to see it. Liam pulled a notebook from his backpack and showed Eleanor his assignment. It was a simple family tree with pictures and descriptions. This is my dad, he said, pointing to Marcus's picture. He keeps people safe for work, and he makes the best pancakes, and he always reads me stories before bed. That's wonderful. What about this picture? Eleanor pointed to a photo of a woman with Liam's eyes. That's my mom. She died when I was little, but Dad says she loved me very much, and she's watching over us. Marcus saw Eleanor's eyes fill with tears. She sounds like she was very special. Dad says I have her smile. Do you think so? I think you have a beautiful smile that's all your own. After Liam had fallen asleep on the couch watching a movie, Marcus and Eleanor sat together in the quiet kitchen. He's amazing, Eleanor said softly. You've done such a good job with him. Thank you. He likes you too, I can tell. How can you tell? He's relaxed around you. Liam's shy with most new people, but he opened up to you right away. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I never thought about having children. My parents weren't exactly loving role models. You're good with him. Natural. I hope so, because if we're going to be together, I want to be good for both of you. Marcus took her hand across the table. You already are. Over the following weeks, they developed a new routine. Marcus would finish his official duties each day, and then he and Eleanor would spend time together as a couple. Sometimes Liam would join them for dinner or weekend activities, and watching Eleanor interact with his son filled Marcus with a happiness he hadn't known was possible. Eleanor was patient with Liam's endless questions, gentle with his occasional tears, and enthusiastic about his interests. She came to his soccer games, helped with school projects, and read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters. She's like a fairy godmother, Liam told Marcus one evening. Except real. But their happiness was fragile, and they both knew it. The outside world hadn't intruded on their carefully constructed bubble yet, but it was only a matter of time. The intrusion came on a Wednesday afternoon in the form of Eleanor's father. Thomas Whitmore arrived at the estate unannounced, striding into Eleanor's office like he owned the place, which, Marcus supposed, he probably did. Eleanor, we need to talk. Marcus was standing near the window, reviewing security reports, when Thomas noticed him. Who is this? He demanded, looking at Marcus like he was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. This is Marcus Reed, my security consultant, Eleanor said carefully. Marcus, this is my father, Thomas Whitmore. Thomas barely acknowledged the introduction. I need to speak with you privately, Eleanor. Marcus is... I said privately. Eleanor looked at Marcus apologetically. Would you mind giving us a few minutes? Marcus nodded and left the room, but he could hear raised voices through the heavy door. After 20 minutes, Thomas stormed out of the office without acknowledging Marcus's existence. Eleanor emerged, looking pale and shaken. What happened? Marcus asked. Someone saw us together at your son's soccer game last weekend. They took pictures. Marcus felt his blood chill. What kind of pictures? Us holding hands, you with your arm around me. Normal couple things, but... Eleanor trailed off. But not normal for a white billionaire and her black employee. My father's concerned about the family's reputation, about what people will think. Marcus studied Eleanor's face, looking for signs of what she was really thinking. And what do you think? I think I don't care what people think. But I'm scared about what this might mean for you, for Liam. People can be cruel. We knew this might happen. Knowing it and living it are different things. Marcus pulled Eleanor into his arms, feeling her trembling against his chest. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, unless you want to stop this. No. Eleanor's voice was fierce. I don't want to stop this. I want to fight for us. Then that's what we'll do. But even as he held her, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful bubble was about to burst, and when it did, they would discover just how strong their love really was.